Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and a very warm welcome to today's edition of Business Africa. I'm your host, Afolake Oyeloye. The top stories this week. The recently concluded UN General Assembly underscores African priorities, emphasizes climate action and the need for global collaboration. African nation stresses equitable representation at global financial institutions. We bring you the detailed report on this. Recent floods in Libya are causing a significant economic impact, shifting focus to recovery efforts amid existing socio-economic challenges. Despite this, Libya, a major oil producer, is seeing signs of economic recovery. Cameroon's remarkable stride towards sustainable energy. 30-megawatt solar power plants illuminate the north, alleviating decades of power shortages and elevating accessibility for local communities. In a pivotal moment at the recent UN General Assembly, African nations took the center stage. With a resolute call for equitable representation at the international financial institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank, they highlighted the urgency of addressing not only climate change but also hunger, poverty and debt.
This year's UN General Assembly highlighted African priorities with a strong focus on climate action, debt relief and the need for collective action. African nations stressed the importance of fair representation at international financial institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank to address not only climate change but also hunger, poverty and debt. As the world reaches the halfway mark in pursuing global goals, challenges loom large. The COVID-19 pandemic led to the first rise in global poverty in generations. At the same time, the climate crisis intensifies, while debt burdens African economies, hindering investments in sustainable development. Shockingly, African nations pay a 500% premium on commercial debt compared to borrowing from the World Bank, necessitating urgent reforms. While the General Assembly witnessed numerous statements and calls to action, experts argue for a comprehensive 2% plan, which means allocating 2% of global GDP to green jobs, sustainable energy and resilient infrastructure, mirroring global defense spending. This holistic approach is essential for addressing interconnected challenges effectively. Efforts to develop Pan-African positions on World Bank reform gain momentum, supported by Agenda 2063, a comprehensive plan of action ratified by all African Union member states.
David McNair is a development expert and is the executive director of the One campaign. He joins us for more on that story. Welcome, David. Now, you were in New York for the UN General Assemblies. How did you perceive the level of international cooperation and support for Africa's development goals in the discussions?
Well, in Africa, we're seeing more and more of a concerted effort to develop Pan-African positions on things like World Bank reform. And of course, we have the Agenda 2063, which is agreed by all AU member states and is a plan for action. I think the problem is that the governments that have the real power to unlock finance to deliver these goals are still the governments that were, major powers in the past. The G7 governments, the US, France, Germany, UK, and sadly they don't have the political incentives or necessarily the foresight to make these changes. So that's why we need a movement of people all around the world calling for change. We need to unlock the transformation that we need in our energy system and in our infrastructure and creating jobs for the millions and millions of African young people that need them.
Now, can you comment on any partnership or collaboration announced during the General Assembly's meetings that could have a possible impact on the development goals for African nations?
There were a number of commitments from philanthropies and from companies which are important, as well as announcements from governments. One in particular is a new announcement from Google and the One campaign to unlock the power of data and artificial intelligence to help track the global goals and also find solutions to help people understand what's going on so they can take action in their own lives. So through that partnership, we'll be focusing particularly on climate finance, making sure that promises are delivered, making sure that it's going to the places where it's needed most and will have the greatest impact, but also empowering people to understand what's going on so that they can ask questions of their political leaders and demand that impact and promises are delivered.
Now, can you share insight on commitments or pledges made by international actors?
Again, there were lots of calls for change, but limited announcements on the scale that is really needed. So Canada, for example, committed to use its special drawing rights, which is an IMF reserve asset, to support vulnerable countries through their fiscal challenges that are created by the current debt crisis. But again, we need something that's much bigger, that addresses the high cost of borrowing that African countries face, a 500% premium. And we need much more investment in clean energy, green jobs and infrastructure. We need a 2% plan for people and planet. And that was not announced at the UN General Assembly.
Now, looking ahead, what are the prospects for Africa's development, and what should we watch out for in terms of the UN General Assembly's impact on the continent in the coming years?
Look, Africa's potential is huge. The African Climate Summit, which was hosted by President Ruto in September, showed that Africa has climate solutions to offer the whole world. It has 70% of the world's solar potential. It has critical minerals for the energy transition. It has forests that remove more carbon from the atmosphere than the Amazon. But without low-cost investment at the scale that's needed, that potential just isn't going to be realized, because the investors that need to come in just aren't getting the returns that they need. So we need to unlock this World Bank reform and deliver this 2% plan for people and planet.
David McNair, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Wonderful, thank you.
In Libya, recent floods not only wreaked havoc but also exposed economic vulnerabilities. High unemployment, oil dependency and political fragility have been compounded by the disaster. Yet signs of recovery in the oil sector and international interest in investment provide some hope amid ongoing diversification challenges.
Recent floods in Libya are causing economic concerns, exacerbating existing challenges such as high unemployment, overdependence on oil, political fragmentation, and security instability. The floods have disrupted the economy, diverting attention towards rescue and recovery efforts, with humanitarian agencies requesting $71.4 million to aid those affected. Libya, an OPEC member, seeks to boost oil production amid past conflicts. There are signs of economic recovery, with a projected 17.5% GDP growth in 2023, after a 12.8% contraction in 2022, according to IMF data. Oil dominates Libya's economy, constituting 95% of exports and government revenue. International oil giants like Eni and Total Energies are eyeing Libya for investment, as the nation aims for 1.3 million barrels per day by year-end and 2 million barrels per day by 2027. Despite optimism, experts remain cautious about Libya's economic diversification due to persistent challenges.
Cameroon has launched 2 groundbreaking solar power facilities in Gouda and Maroua cities with a combined capacity of 30 megawatts. Now, these plans are a major achievement for the energy-starved northern regions, addressing long-standing power issues and significantly enhancing access to electricity for the local people.
Cameroon has inaugurated and commissioned for use 2 solar power plants. The plants are the largest of its kind built in the country. Located in Gouda and Maroua in the north and far north regions, each of the plants has an electricity generating capacity of 30 megawatts. These solar voltaic power plants may seem small, but in my view, it meets the needs of the people in this part of the country. They're quite important. Cameroon has just made a good move, because we're talking about 230 megawatts, so roughly 60 megawatts that will be injected in the northern interconnected grid. According to these experts, Cameroon will produce 6% of its energy from solar power compared with 1% recorded a few years ago. This power plant will make up for a serious energy deficit in Cameroon's northern regions where power cuts have been commonplace for years. It's still 70% of Cameroon's energy potential, or 70% of Cameroon's energy production, that's becoming renewable, because we already have 64 to 66% produced in the country that's made from hydroelectricity. According to Cameroon's Minister of Energy, Gaston Elondu Esomba, major savings of $30 million have been made since the commissioning of this power plant. Better still, the company in charge of electricity say they will considerably reduce production costs, which was on the rise with the use of thermal power plants, and in its bid to combat climate change. Analysts believe the solar power plant is a breath of fresh air for the northern regions, especially the town of Marua, which has seen all its water resources dry up in recent years due to drought and climate change.
And that's all we had for you this week on Business Africa. Thanks for joining us. For more business stories and news, stay tuned to Africanews and Africanews.com.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.